The little girl didn't run into the hospital lobby. She crashed into it. Her shoes squeaked across the polished floor as she pushed through the glass doors, clutching a wrinkled photograph in her trembling hands. Nurses looked up in confusion while doctors hurried past, but the girl didn't stop for anyone, because she wasn't looking for a doctor. She was looking for a billionaire. Her name was Alina Cruz, and she was only 9 years old. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she scanned the crowded hospital lobby until her eyes landed on a tall man surrounded by security, guards, and reporters. Cameras flashed around him like fireworks, capturing every step he took. The man in the center of the attention was Adrian Whitmore, the Millionaire CEO whose company had just donated $50 million to build the hospital's new research wing. To everyone else in the building, Adrian Whitmore was a headline. To Alina, he was the last hope her family had left. She ran straight toward him. Security stepped forward instantly. "Sir, stay back," one guard began. But Alina slipped past them before anyone could stop her and reached the man everyone else was trying to protect. She grabbed the sleeve of Adrian's expensive suit with both small hands. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. The cameras froze. The reporters stopped talking. Even the doctors slowed down in the hallway as the small girl clung to the billionaire CEO like he was the only thing keeping her standing. Adrian Whitmore looked down at the trembling child holding onto his arm. His security team moved closer. "Sir, we should." Adrian raised a hand, stopping them before they could pull her away. The movement was small, but it silenced the entire room. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Alina lifted the photograph she had been clutching the entire time. It showed 2 girls standing in front of a small apartment building. One of them looked exactly like Alina. The other girl was lying in a hospital bed, pale beneath a thin blanket. "That's my sister," Alina whispered. Adrian studied the picture for a moment, and Alina's voice cracked as the words came out. "She's upstairs." Adrian frowned slightly. "Then you should talk to a doctor." "We did," Alina said, her small fingers tightening around the photograph. "They said the surgery costs $200,000. The reporters standing nearby exchanged glances. Sensing something bigger than a donation announcement, Adrian remained calm as he looked at the girl again. "Why are you telling me?" Alina swallowed hard before answering. "Because they said if we don't pay today." Her voice broke completely. "She won't live." The hospital lobby fell silent as dozens of people, doctors, nurses, patients, and reporters turned to watch the moment unfolding. Alina looked up at the billionaire CEO with eyes full of desperation. "Please," she whispered again, "save my sister." For a long moment, Adrian Whitmore didn't say anything. He stared at the photograph and the girl's shaking hands before asking one quiet question. "How old is she?" Alina wiped her face with her sleeve. 7. Adrian slowly looked toward the elevator leading to the pediatric wing as reporters leaned forward and the hospital director stood frozen near the reception desk, because everyone suddenly understood something. What Adrian Whitmore said next would decide whether a child upstairs lived or died, and when the billionaire CEO finally spoke, the entire hospital went silent. For a few seconds, Adrian Whitmore didn't answer the little girl. The reporters' cameras kept flashing, security guards stood tense around him, and hospital staff watched from the hallways like witnesses waiting for a verdict. But Adrian wasn't looking at them. He was looking only at the photograph in Alina Cruz's trembling hands. "Take me to her," he said quietly. The sentence was simple, but it moved the entire room. Alina blinked, as if she hadn't expected the words to be real. Then she grabbed Adrian's hand and started pulling him toward the elevators before anyone could change their mind. The reporters rushed after them, and the hospital director hurried to keep up. "Mr. Whitmore, if this is about funding, we can arrange a private." Adrian raised his hand slightly. "Just show me the patient." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and the group stepped inside. Alina stood close beside him, clutching the photograph like it was the only thing holding her together. Adrian noticed her small hands shaking. "What's your sister's name?" he asked. "Marisol," Alina whispered. The elevator reached the pediatric floor, and when the doors opened, the smell of antiseptic filled the hallway. Nurses paused at their stations as the unexpected group moved toward room 214. Alina ran ahead and pushed the door open. Inside the room, a little girl lay in a hospital bed surrounded by machines. Marisol Cruz looked much smaller than 7. Her skin was pale, and a quiet beeping sound echoed from the heart monitor beside her bed. Tubes ran from the machines to her small arms, and an oxygen mask covered part of her face. Alina rushed to her side. "I brought someone," she whispered gently. A tired woman sitting beside the bed stood up quickly. "Son or Whitmore?" she asked in disbelief. "It was their mother." She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Adrian nodded politely. "I understand there's a surgery scheduled," he said. The woman's eyes filled with tears immediately. Yes," she said, "but the hospital requires payment first." "We've tried everything. Loans, charities, even selling our apartment." Her voice cracked. "We ran out of time." The hospital director cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Whitmore, this procedure involves a very rare cardiac reconstruction. The surgeon has agreed to perform it, but the cost is $200,000, Adrian finished. The director nodded. "Yes." Alina looked up at Adrian again. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't cried since entering the room. It was the look of someone who had already cried too much. "Please," she whispered again. Adrian walked slowly toward the hospital bed and studied the monitors. Then he looked at the surgeon standing near the wall. Without the surgery, Adrian asked calmly, "How long does she have?" The surgeon hesitated before answering honestly. "Less than 24 hours. The words seemed to pull the air out of the room. Alina grabbed her sister's hand while their mother covered her mouth, trying not to break down again. Adrian stood very still. Everyone expected him to pull out his phone and approve the payment, but Adrian Whitmore didn't reach for his phone. Instead, he asked a question that made the entire hospital staff look at each other in shock. "Why hasn't the surgery started already?" The question hung in the hospital room like a sudden crack of thunder. The surgeon glanced at the hospital director, unsure how to answer. For a moment no one spoke, and even the quiet beeping of the machines seemed louder in the silence. "Mr. Whitmore," the director began carefully, "hospital policy requires payment confirmation before we proceed with procedures of this scale." Adrian didn't look at him. His eyes were still fixed on the small girl lying in the bed. "So if someone can't pay fast enough," Adrian said slowly, "you let the clock run out on a 7-year-old? Ass." The director shifted uncomfortably. "That's not how we would describe it." Adrian's expression didn't change. "But that's exactly what it is." Alina squeezed her sister's hand tighter. Marisol's eyes fluttered slightly behind the oxygen mask, barely awake but still aware that something serious was happening around her. Their mother stood beside the bed, looking completely helpless. The surgeon cleared his throat quietly. "Technically," he said, "we could begin preparation immediately if authorization is given." Adrian finally turned toward him. "How long does the surgery take?" Adrian asked. 6 hours, the surgeon replied. "And it's extremely delicate." Adrian nodded once, absorbing the answer without hesitation. "Then why are we wasting time talking?" The surgeon instinctively looked toward the hospital director again. The director hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore, without the financial authorization?" Adrian interrupted him. I'm not asking you about the money." The room fell silent again. "I'm asking you," Adrian continued calmly, "if you're capable of saving her." The surgeon didn't hesitate this time. "Yes." Adrian pointed toward the operating wing. "Then start." The hospital director stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Whitmore, the payment still has to be processed. Even if you're covering the cost," the paperwork. Adrian slowly reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Everyone assumed he was pulling out his phone or a credit card. But instead, he placed a small black card on the bedside table. It wasn't a credit card. It was his corporate access pass. The hospital director frowned. "What is this?" Adrian looked directly at him. "You just named the new pediatric research wing after my company," he said calmly. The director nodded cautiously. "Yes." Adrian gestured toward the hallway. "Which means this hospital was built with my foundation's money." The realization slowly spread across the director's face as Adrian spoke again, his voice steady and calm. "So here's the decision you need to make." He paused briefly, his eyes moving to the small girl in the bed. "Either the surgery starts right now, or the Whitmore Foundation withdraws every dollar it has invested in this building." The room went completely silent, because suddenly the hospital director understood something terrifying. The billionaire CEO hadn't just offered to pay for the surgery, he had turned the entire hospital into the decision. For 3 seconds, nobody in the room moved. The surgeon stood frozen near the bed, The hospital director stared at the black corporate card on the table like it had suddenly become the most dangerous object in the building. Even the reporters outside the room had stopped whispering. Adrian Whitmore didn't raise his voice, and he didn't repeat the threat. He simply stood there calmly, waiting. The silence stretched across the room until the surgeon finally broke it. "We're wasting time," he said firmly. He turned to the nurses. "Prep the operating room." The nurses moved instantly. Within seconds, the quiet hospital room turned into controlled chaos as machines were checked. Monitors were unplugged, and Marisol's bed began rolling toward the hallway. Alina ran beside the moving bed, holding her sister's hand as long as she could. "Is she going to be okay?" she asked the surgeon with a trembling voice. He looked down at her gently. "We're going to try everything." The doors to the operating wing closed behind them, sealing the hallway in tense silence. Marisol's mother sank heavily into one of the waiting chairs, her hands trembling while Alina stood beside her, staring at the red light above the operating room door that signaled surgery had begun. Adrian remained standing quietly near the wall. The hospital director approached him cautiously. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "I hope you understand that our policies exist for legal reasons." Adrian looked at him without anger. "Policies are supposed to protect people," Adrian replied calmly, gesturing toward the operating room doors, "not delay saving them." The director opened his mouth but had no answer. Hours passed slowly. Downstairs, the hospital lobby continued its usual rhythm of emergencies, visitors and night shift nurses arriving for work. But on the pediatric floor, time seemed frozen as everyone waited. After 6 long hours, the red light above the operating room finally switched off. The surgeon stepped out, removing his gloves as the doors closed behind him. Alina jumped to her feet immediately. "Did she make it?" she asked. The surgeon slowly removed his mask and then smiled. The surgery worked. Alina burst into tears of relief and threw her arms around her mother, while several nurses nearby quietly wiped tears from their own eyes. Adrian exhaled slowly as the tension finally left the hallway. The surgeon walked over to him. "You saved her life tonight," he said. Adrian shook his head and glanced toward Alina hugging her mother. "No," he replied softly. "She did. Most people ask billionaires for money. She asked for courage." The next morning, the hospital board held an emergency meeting. By the end of the day, a new policy had been announced. No child would ever again have a life-saving surgery delayed because of payment. Weeks later, when Marisol finally walked out of the hospital holding her sister's hand, a new sign had been placed outside the pediatric wing that read, "The Cruz Children's Emergency Fund, no child waits for life," and the hospital staff never forgot the night a little girl walked into the lobby and made a billionaire change the rules.